Today we're going to talk about an event that took place over 6 centuries ago, the Bal d'Ardens, also known as the Ball of the Burning Man. The Bal d'Ardens took place on January 28, 1393 in Paris, France. The ball was held in celebration of the marriage of the Duke of Orleans, Louis I, to Valentine Visconti, the daughter of the Duke of Milan. It was supposed to be a grand and joyous occasion, but it ended up becoming one of the most bizarre and gruesome events in the history of France. Masquerade balls were frequently extravagant events and incredibly popular during that time, especially with King Charles VI. Typically, the hosts and guests at these fancy dress gatherings for the wealthy and privileged try to outdo one another in the luxury of their attire and look. Those attending the celebration do so while hiding their identities out of fear of accidentally flirting with the king. While masquerade balls are typically occasions for joy and entertainment, they have occasionally been disastrous due to scandalous breakdowns in decorum. One specific incident was the Ball of the Burning Men, which came dangerously close to taking the French king's life, which raises the question, how could the king possibly be in danger in this way? Initially, there was a party. A masquerade dance was organized on January 28, 1393, to commemorate one of the Queen's ladies in third waiting's marriage. Isabeau of Bavaria, the Queen, looked for events to celebrate and entertain her husband Charles VI of France. The main aim was to distract the king, as he had recently suffered from a psychotic break, attacking his own men while marching with his army. Known as Charles the Mad in his later years, the king was most definitely not well, and this ball probably did not help. King Charles VI was known for suffering from mental illness. He had periods of lucidity, but he also had episodes of delusions, paranoia, and hallucinations. During one of these episodes, he became convinced that his advisors were plotting against him. He even believed that his own brother, Louis I, was trying to kill him. The event took place at the Royal Palace of Hétal St. Paul. The main entertainment of the masquerade ball was a charivari, a type of performance that was given by 6 senior knights of the court who dressed as wild men of the woods. It was time for charivari as the day's major events came to an end. The young monarch became involved in charivari at the advice of Huguet de Guisset, a member of Charles VI's court. 5 of Charles VI's companions, and he appropriately dressed themselves as wild men. The majority of the time, charivari's garments were composed of linen and resin wax and pitch-soaked. Flax threads were sewn into the dancers' clothing to give them a wild, hairy appearance. The dancers also completely covered their faces with hair masks. Guessing the dancer's identity was one of the games played during charivari. The plan was to surprise the guests by revealing that Charles VI had been dancing in front of them. However, very few persons in the audience that day actually knew that he was one of the dancers. The 6 men, including the monarch, were chained together to complete the appearance. The 6 males then made their way into the large hall and began to dance in a wild, hysterical manner. They made an effort to amuse the crowd by acting like wild men. The outcome is already rather obvious. Although the court authorities were fully aware of the dangers of dressing in such a manner in this time of torches and candles, since the costumes were made of flammable materials and might quickly catch fire. It was strictly forbidden to carry or light any torches inside the hall. The 6 men continued their wild dance. The dancers persisted in their frenzied cavorting while making lewd gestures. The nobility in the room laughed and made an effort to identify the dancers. 2 late arriving visitors entered the hall at that time. One of the men was Philippe de Bar, while the other was Louis, Duke of Orleans, the king's brother. Despite the fact that they were both late and utterly intoxicated, the 2 men stumbled into the hall carrying their torches. Louis, the Duke of Orleans, the king's brother, had previously been one of the advisors suspected of plotting against the king, and his motives for his actions on this night is still highly debated. The two men moved swiftly toward the dancing men, and it is widely thought Louis took a lit torch and held it up to the faces of the dancing wild men in an effort to identify them. One source claims that one of the dancer's legs caught fire when a single spark from the lit flame landed on his outfit, but others claim he purposely lit the dancer's leg afire, thinking it would be funny, leading to accusations of his trying to kill the king. The problem with this would have been that he had no idea the king was part of the dancers. According to other accounts, Louis's excessive intoxication was at fault. Other accounts claim Louis I had thrown the torch at the dancers, causing their flammable costumes to catch fire. In any scenario, the dancer's attire caught fire, and as he burnt, the flames quickly moved from one dancer to the next, and the hall descended into chaos. The 6 men dancing, including Charles VI, the monarch, were all set ablaze. The queen began shrieking in terror as soon as she realized one of the crazed masked men was her husband. As the terrible tragedy played out, many other people in the hallway also caught fire. Among all the people present in the hall, Joan, the Duchess de Berry, a 15-year-old noble lady, was the most composed one, and instead of being afraid, she fearlessly approached the king and identified him by his features. Acting quickly, she gathered the train of her dress and threw it on the king to smother the flame. But the other men were not so lucky, and as the fire consumed their flesh, they could be heard screaming. Among the 6 men who were dancing, only 2 survived, one of them being King Charles VI. The only other survivor was one of his knights. His costume that was in flames was also extinguished by Joan, the Duchess de Berry. The other person who survived the disaster was Sir de Nantwillat. Thinking quickly, he had jumped into a vat of water to douse his burning costume. The remaining 4 dancers died in the tragic event. Huguet de Guisset, who instigated the wild man charade, was also injured by the flames and died 3 days later. The entire incident incited rage among French people. They began accusing King Charles VI's brother Louis I. When Louis I made the decision to make amends for his error, the citizens' rage gradually subsided. He sent a sizable donation to the Celestini monastery in Paris in order to build a chapel. In addition, to express their regret to the populace, King Charles and his uncles rode through the city in a royal parade of humility. Charles's already vulnerable mind was overwhelmed by the shock of the Ball of the Burning Men occurrence. Throughout his life, his illness grew worse until he lost control and went insane, to the point where he began to believe he was made of glass. The incident caused a scandal in France. The Duke of Orleans was widely blamed for Carouge's death, and it further damaged his already shaky reputation. King Charles VI was particularly affected by the event. He was present at the ball but had left before the incident occurred. When he heard what had happened, he was overcome with guilt and grief. He believed that he was responsible for Carouge's death, as he had allowed the ball to take place. To atone for his perceived sins, King Charles VI began a series of religious pilgrimages. He also established a new order of knights, the Order of the Passion, which was dedicated to the memory of Carouges and to the idea of chivalry. The order's symbol was a heart, which was meant to represent the Passion of Christ. The Bal d'Ardence became a legend in France. It was retold in literature and art, and it was often used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess and frivolity. The event also had political ramifications. The Duke of Orleans' reputation never fully recovered, and he was eventually assassinated in 1407. Although he would rule for almost another 30 years, and lived to see the English defeat his grand army at Agincourt until his death, his position as a king from this point on was only ceremonial. Charles may not have died that night, but he was scarred forever. It could be speculated that this was all a planned plot to kill the king, since no one made an effort to put out the fire despite a small amount of knowing the king was on fire. Has it not been for the bravery of that 15-year-old girl, Joan, the king would have perished in the fire. What are your thoughts on this horrifying event? Was Louis to blame, or were there more people at fault? Or maybe this was all planned in a plot to kill the king, and had it not been for that 15-year-old girl, the king would be dead. Let me know in the comments. If you found the video interesting, leave a like, and want to hear about more moments from history not widely known, subscribe.